There's a moment that happens once in a generation when the weight of history becomes so visible that you cannot look away from it. King Charles stood before the joint session of Congress and delivered a speech that was not about ceremony. It was about something far more consequential. Most people will watch this moment and see a royal address. They will hear the formality, the tradition, the pageantry, but if you listen closely to what he actually said, you will discover something most mainstream analysis is completely missing. The real message was not about the past. It was about a choice America and Britain must make right now in this exact moment about what comes next. And understanding why he said it the way he did changes everything about how you read the current state of the world. Let me show you what is actually happening here. King Charles did not come to Congress to reminisce. He came to deliver a warning wrapped in the language of partnership. When he stood in that chamber and spoke about the alliance between America and Britain, he was not making a historical observation. He was making a statement about necessity. He said something that cut through all the noise. He said that this alliance cannot rest on the past. It cannot assume that principles still endure. That is not ceremonial language. That is a sovereign telling another nation that the foundations we have relied on are shifting, and we need to rebuild them now, not later. If you find yourself questioning whether this speech was really just about tradition and history, you are right to question it. I want to hear what you think is really happening in the comments below. And if you want to understand the deeper analysis of how these moments reshape geopolitical alignments, make sure you are following along so you do not miss what comes next. Here is what the surface version of this speech looks like. A reigning British monarch addresses Congress. He speaks about shared values. He mentions the special relationship between two nations. He talks about defense partnerships and economic ties. The mainstream take is straightforward. This is a ceremonial affirmation of a historic alliance. Britain and America are friends. They have been for centuries. They will remain so. The speech reinforces that narrative. It is warm, it is respectful, it is diplomatic. But this interpretation misses the entire structure of what King Charles actually communicated. He did not come to affirm what already exists. He came to signal that what already exists is no longer enough. The deeper you go into how he framed the alliance, the harder it becomes to look at the surface version and take it seriously. Let me show you the reframing. King Charles made a specific choice in how he opened this address. He did not begin by celebrating the past. He began by acknowledging crisis. He said we meet in times of great uncertainty, in times of conflict from Europe to the Middle East. He mentioned the incident near the capital itself, the attack on leadership, the attempt to foment fear and discord. He said such acts of violence will never succeed. But here is what that choice reveals. He was not simply condemning terrorism. He was establishing a premise. The premise was this: the world we thought was stable is not stable anymore. The systems we relied on are under pressure. And from that premise, everything else in his speech flows. He then moved to something even more revealing. He talked about how his mother, Queen Elizabeth, addressed Congress in 1991. He said, "It is hard not to feel the weight of history on my shoulders." But he did not say that because he was overwhelmed by tradition. He said it because the world in 1991 and the world in 2025 are not the same world. In 1991, the Cold War had just ended. The Soviet Union was collapsing. America stood as the sole superpower. The alliance between Britain and America was unquestioned. It was the foundation of the entire post-war order. But King Charles was not speaking to that world. He was speaking to this world, a world where that order is fracturing. Now look at the specific mechanism he used to communicate this. He talked about the principles that bind the two nations. He cited Magna Carta. He referenced the Bill of Rights. He mentioned the Declaration of Independence. He spoke about the shared democratic and legal traditions. But he did something crucial. He did not present these as settled foundations. He presented them as principles that must be actively defended. He said the alliance cannot rest on the past. It must be built on. He said the challenges we face are too great for any one nation to bear alone. That is not the language of a secure alliance. That is the language of an alliance under strain, reaching out for renewal. Think about what that actually means. When a sovereign of Britain's standing comes to Congress and says we must not disregard everything that has sustained us for 80 years, but instead we must build on it, he is signaling that the current level of commitment is insufficient. The current framework is inadequate. Something more is required. Here is where the system breakdown becomes visible. King Charles then moved to defense. He said the United Kingdom recognizes that the threats we face demand a transformation in British defense. He announced the biggest sustained increase in defense spending since the Cold War. He spoke about commitments to Ukraine. He talked about NATO's response to terrorism. He discussed the F-35s being built jointly. He mentioned the most ambitious submarine program in history, being undertaken in partnership with Australia. Each of these statements was not ceremonial. Each was a concrete announcement of escalating commitment. But the key insight is this. He was not announcing these things because the alliance was strong. He was announcing them because the alliance needed to be strengthened. The level of military coordination, the scale of defense investment, the expansion of the partnership to include Australia and submarine technology, these are the actions of nations that recognize a fundamental shift in the global balance of power. And they are moving to counter it. Let me escalate this further. King Charles then addressed something most people in the American political establishment are avoiding. He spoke directly about nature, about environmental collapse, about critical natural systems threatening far more than harmony and diversity. He said we ignore at our peril the fact that natural systems provide the foundation for our prosperity and our national security. That is not environmental rhetoric. That is a statement about the material basis of geopolitical power. He was saying that the alliance between America and Britain cannot be sustained on military and economic ties alone. It must be sustained on the foundation of environmental stability and resource security. He was signaling that climate change, resource scarcity, and environmental collapse are not peripheral to the alliance. They are central to it. And if America and Britain do not act together to address these challenges, the alliance itself will erode from the inside. The weight of that implication is enormous. It means that the traditional framework of the special relationship, based on military coordination and economic partnership, is now insufficient. A new framework is required, one that includes environmental and resource security as a core pillar. Then King Charles delivered something that most analysis has completely overlooked. He quoted President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. He said, "The world may little note what we say, but we will never forget what we do." And then he said this: "To the United States of America, on your 250th birthday, let our two countries rededicate ourselves to each other in the selfless service of our peoples and of all the peoples of the world." He did not say, "Let us maintain our alliance." He said, "Let us rededicate ourselves." Rededication implies that the previous dedication has weakened. It implies that renewal is necessary. It implies that without this rededication, the alliance will continue to drift. That realization changes everything about how you read what happens next and what has already happened without anyone calling it by its real name. Here's the key insight that reorders everything. King Charles was not delivering a speech about the past. He was delivering a speech about a future that has not yet been decided. He was using the language of history and tradition to communicate something far more urgent. He was saying that America and Britain stand at a crossroads. One path leads to continued partnership, deepened commitment, shared sacrifice in the face of unprecedented challenges. The other path leads to inward retreat, the dissolution of the alliance, and the emergence of a world order in which neither nation can guarantee its own security or prosperity. He was presenting these not as abstract possibilities, but as real choices that must be made now. The speech was a call to action disguised as a ceremonial address, and the specific actions he was calling for were these: increased defense spending and military coordination, expansion of the alliance to include new partners like Australia in critical technologies, integration of environmental and resource security into the core framework of the alliance, and, most importantly, a rededication of both nations to the principles that have bound them together, understood not as historical artifacts but as living commitments that must be actively renewed. Now let me show you what happens next. If King Charles's message is heard and acted upon, the next phase of the alliance will look very different from what came before. We will see accelerated military integration between Britain and America. We will see joint defense initiatives in the Arctic, in the Atlantic, and in the Pacific. We will see coordination on technology transfer and quantum computing, nuclear fusion, and artificial intelligence. We will see coordinated environmental and resource policies designed to ensure that both nations have secure access to critical materials and energy sources. We will see the expansion of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance to include new partners and new domains of coordination. The conditions under which this path becomes more likely are these: if the threats King Charles referenced continue to escalate, if Russia continues to advance in Ukraine, if China continues to expand its military presence in the Pacific, if environmental degradation accelerates and resource competition intensifies, all of these conditions are present now, and they are worsening. The conditions under which this path becomes less likely are fewer. They would require a fundamental shift in the geopolitical environment, a resolution of the Ukraine conflict through negotiation rather than military victory, a de-escalation of tensions between America and China, a global agreement on environmental protection and resource sharing. None of these seem likely in the near term. So the trajectory is clear. The alliance between America and Britain will deepen. It will expand. It will be tested in ways it has not been tested in decades. And the nations that remain committed to it will emerge stronger. The nations that retreat from it will find themselves increasingly isolated. But here is what stays with me about this moment. It is not the specific announcements King Charles made. It is not the defense spending or the technology partnerships or the environmental commitments. It is the moment when a sovereign of one of the world's oldest and most stable nations came to Congress and essentially said the world we built after the Second World War is no longer sufficient. The alliance that has held for 80 years must be renewed. The principles that have guided us must be actively defended. The future cannot be assumed. It must be fought for. That is a statement of profound uncertainty. It is a statement that comes from someone who understands deeply and completely that the foundations of global order are shifting. And it comes at a moment when most of the political establishment in America is still operating as though those foundations are solid. King Charles knows something that most American politicians have not yet fully grasped. The world is changing faster than the institutions designed to manage it. And if those institutions do not adapt, they will break. The part that stays with me is not the outcome. It is the moment when a leader who could have chosen to deliver a ceremonial address instead chose to deliver a warning. Where do you think that line is between what a leader knows and what they are willing to say? Leave your answer in the comments. Because understanding that line is understanding how the world actually works. The alliance between America and Britain is not a relic of the past. It is a choice that must be made again and again in each generation under new conditions with new stakes. King Charles came to Congress to say that this generation must make that choice now. And the choice is not between maintaining the past or abandoning it. The choice is between renewal and dissolution, between deepening commitment and gradual retreat, between the hard work of building something new on the foundations of something old or watching those foundations crumble. That is what his speech was really about. And that is why it matters far more than the ceremonial reading of it suggests.